the voting rights bill, the people had a singular experience. They had a sense that they were not alone and they could call on other people. And the technologies that exist today to put a demonstration together, we did not have. And that is the responsibility of young people. Each generation will have to discover its mission and either fulfill that mission or betray it. This is a lifelong journey. We accomplished a lot of things in terms of change in this country, but we know it's not enough. And we know that if we are to carry on to make this country a better country, it is now on the shoulders of the young people to carry it on. And they now have to fulfill a mission.
I'm April Ryan, your host, and on behalf of the Coalition of Civil Rights and Social Justice Organizations, I welcome you to the 2020 Virtual March on Washington, commemorating the 57th anniversary of the historic March on Washington that took place in 1963. Even in the midst of an unprecedented global pandemic, it became clear that African Americans can be needlessly attacked jogging in their neighborhood, walking in the park, and sitting at home in their own houses. Atlanta, Georgia rose up in protest. Minneapolis, Minnesota rose up. Houston and Los Angeles. And in Washington, D.C., Mayor Muriel Bowser ordered a mural and created the Black Lives Matter Plaza. City after city, community after community, people proclaimed enough is enough. We have been here before. On August 28, 1963, stemming from a rapidly growing tide of grassroots support and outrage over the nation's racial inequities, about 250,000 people participated in the historic March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. It was a collaborative effort. Civil rights and labor leaders from groups such as SNCC, CORE, NAACP, and the National Urban League, and many others. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., originally slated to speak for 4 minutes, went on to speak for 16 minutes, giving one of the most iconic speeches in history, saying in part, "So we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was the promise that all men, yes, Black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds." His words still ring true today. It is time once again to channel the moment into a movement. Coming days after both the Democratic National Convention and the Republican National Convention, the 2020 Virtual March on Washington will set forth a bold new Black agenda, advocating for comprehensive reform, economic empowerment, and equitable access to healthcare, education, and the ballot box. Over the next 2 days, we will hear from civil rights and social justice leaders, as well as important voices such as House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Senator Cory Booker, Stacey Abrams, Representative Brenda Lawrence, Dr. Yusef Salaam, Reverend Leah Daughtry, and activist Tamika Mallory. We'll feature a video of her, it's called I Can't Breathe, as well as a powerful performance from BB Winans, Lisa Ramey, Macy Gray, PJ Morton, and much, much more. And on Friday night, Reverend Dr. William Barber from the Poor People's Campaign will deliver the charge, what we need to do to move from protest to power. Next up, is a clip we call Straight from Social, highlighting what you all experienced over the last few months, followed by a performance of the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing, written by James Weldon Johnson and performed by Jarrett Johnson, one of the NAACP winners of the Lift Every Voice and Sing competition. Jarrett is an aspiring solo artist, session singer for film and television, and an activist who believes in inclusion and equity in the music industry for all musicians. Jarrett, you're speaking our language. Following Jarrett's performance, we will hear from Derek Johnson, President and CEO of the NAACP, Representative Brenda Lawrence of Michigan, and Reverend Al Sharpton from the National Action Network.
No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace.
Through fear and fire, hell and hoses, bullets and bridges. We have been Edmund Pettus more times than we can remember. Bloody Sundays always spill to the ends of the week at some point. We just want a Saturday to feel like one. But these days, all scrambled up and spit out, we live life on the margin while manifesting mountaintops of movement indeed. The seed of a dream planted in the heart and feet of generations rooted and ready, sprouting upward and out, moving forward and onward, basking in light. Can you feel it? The urging, the calling, the cry, the alarm, the whisper, the breaking, the joy, the love, and I'm reminded of Robeson. He said, the battlefront is everywhere. There is no sheltered rear. So unfortunately, there's no luxury in watching from the sideline, no turning your back on the issue, no covering up your eyes. Oh, this is more than a protest, more than catchy slogans on poster boards and signs and hashtags. This is not just about marching. This is about how we stand.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the roar us march on till victory is won.
Hi, I'm Derek Johnson, President and CEO of the NAACP. I want to welcome you to this virtual March on Washington as we commemorate the 57th year of that historic march in 1963. I had the privilege of being on Edmund Pettus Bridge with John Lewis in March of this year. And I can recall him standing on that stoop in a weakened state. And he gave us a charge that we must vote like we've never voted before. And a reflection of the opportunities I've had to be with him and many others over the years who were the youth leaders of the day. Young people who were college age, ordinary people who stood up to do extraordinary things. And one of the lessons I learned from him and Cortland Cox and so many other of the SNCC activists was that movements are intergenerational. It is so critical that our young people continue to add their energy and their voices to this movement. Our youth activists bring energy that some of us wish we still had. Our youth activists walk into spaces with a level of courage that we've seen exemplified by John Lewis as he attempted to cross the bridge in 1965. We must continue to foster and nurture our youth activists. We must continue to make sure that we listen and hear from the wisdom of the elders. The outcome was multiple. It energized a new generation of activists. It created a space for people to leave the march and go back home and do the work required for the changes that we had to see locally. Addressing the widening wealth gap that has plagued many of us for far too long. Dealing with access to quality education in a way in which we are creative, innovative, and holistic in our approach. Making sure we create a healthy society measured by how well we care for our elders, prepare our young people for a bright future, and protect the right of the disadvantaged, however we define disadvantage. Making this a movement, not a moment, is also critical. And it's going to require all of us to make it a reality. This virtual March on Washington is only a stopping place between the work. It is not the work. It is an opportunity for us to re-energize and connect and listen to some of the individuals who have been involved for many years and listen to some of our young people and their perspective and appreciate that all of us have a piece of the solution, but together we are the solution. At the beginning of this pandemic, we declared that we are done dying. We can no longer accept a negative narrative that disempowers us. We must confront the fact that we must control our destiny. And in a democracy, it is through our currency we call the vote. But the vote is only the catalyst towards the public policy required to ensure that we begin to live and breathe life into those constitutional principles that all men and women are created equal and are endowed with certain inalienable rights. That is something that was stated very clear at the March on Washington in 1963, and we must reaffirm that today, that we are equal. We are entitled to equal protection under the law. We shall require that our tax dollars represent our interests. And we will demand at the ballot box and moving forward that Black lives really do matter.
Hello, I'm Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence, proudly representing Michigan's 14th Congressional District. This year, as we celebrate the 57th anniversary of the historic March on Washington, we have a unique opportunity to come together and use the power of our voice. We stand on the shoulders of giants like John Lewis, who fought and sacrificed for justice and equality. And they fought to pave the way for a better tomorrow. 57 years ago, we were not allowed in the room, and we definitely did not have a seat at the table. But now in 2020, we do not only have a seat at the table, but now we have a voice in the conversation and the ability to make lasting change. It is now our time to break down the barriers of social injustice and police brutality which plagued our Black community. It is our time to create equal opportunity and our time to show America that Black lives matter. The fight is not over, and we have a tough battle ahead. Together, we can overcome and build a brighter and better tomorrow. I want everyone to be safe, to just come together and feel the power of our collective strength, to understand the vision and feel empowered and activated to become one of the change makers that we need right now in our country. Enjoy the safe. God be with you.
Hi, I'm Reverend Al Sharpton, President of National Action Network, giving greetings to all of you that are part of the virtual March on Washington on the 57th anniversary of the march that helped to change America, as we are marching this year, some of us in person and some virtually, all for the same cause and to achieve the same goals.
Thank you, President Johnson, Representative Lawrence, and Reverend Al Sharpton. And that performance from Jarrett, wow, you have a very bright future, my friend. Next, we have messages from NAACP Image Awards and Oscar winner, Mahershala Ali, Senator Cory Booker, and my friend, Mark Morial, President of the National Urban League.
Peace. I want to thank the NAACP for hosting this virtual March on Washington. This is a critical election. All elections are important, but I can't emphasize how important this election is. It could be the difference between us taking a leap towards the type of liberation and presence, access and freedom that we've desired for centuries, or it could mean that we are taking several steps back. And we've all witnessed our communities coming together, stepping out onto the streets, and speaking up, organizing, marching, screaming, yelling to be heard, yelling for change, organizing for change, strategizing for change. And for me, I think it just really emphasizes that we need people in office and positions of power who are empathetic, who have a sort of a natural inclination to look out for those who have to really struggle, organize, and come together for their collective voice to even penetrate and be received as a whisper. So to have people in positions of power who are policymakers and lawmakers who keep their ear to the street and who have an innate a consciousness about those who have traditionally not been in power. So it's very important for us to come together so that we can participate in getting people on a local, state, and federal level in positions of power that reflect our interests. So therefore, that can lead to long-term sustainable change, which we all truly desire. So please, please, please vote. Peace.
57 years ago, tomorrow, Hundreds of thousands of Americans, including my mother, gathered together on the mall for the March on Washington. They came to demand justice. The pillars of their platform was everything from economic justice to making sure that we have a nation that has civil rights for all. They indeed moved this country forward, but yet we still have work to do. I remember my mom talking about that day, about how we had a community in unity focused on the dream that King spoke of. The other speakers, from John Lewis to Rabbi Yocham Prince, all demanded that we become the nation that we say we are. But we still now, today, have work to do. We still have a criminal justice system that is tragically unjust. We still see racial disparities that are staggering, from wealth to healthcare outcomes. We must all understand that we are in this together, that we share one destiny. And today, again, we must herald the call for our community to show unity, to exercise our strength and our power, to bend the arc of that moral universe towards justice. We must recognize that we are the arc benders. We must do the work. We must pick up the baton, pick up the torch, and carry it forward from where our parents and grandparents mightily did. I believe in us, our potential and possibility, and I still believe in the dream and the idea of America, carried forward by former slaves, by women denied the right to vote, by people looking for equal justice, always calling to the conscience of this country, to the yearning of all people for us to be a nation of peace, of liberty, of justice, of strength, a wellspring of well-being for all. Thank you for this effort that we are all gathered yet again together. We must continue the work. I am grateful, I am hopeful, and I know that we are the hope, the leaders, the people who can make our country real for all. Thank you.
I'm Mark Morial, and I'm proud to serve as the president of the National Urban League. I'm also proud to stand on the shoulders of my late great predecessor, Whitney Young, who stood as one of the big six civil rights leaders at the Lincoln Memorial on August 28, 1963. 57 years later, we face a crisis of untold proportions. The pandemic of COVID, the pandemic of the economic decline that we face, and the pandemic of racial justice, which remains with us. Today is a day we come together. We come together to acknowledge and support the emerging Black Lives Matter movement as the 21st century civil rights movement. And we also come to recommit and reaffirm our commitment to a nation free of racism, a nation for which there is justice and economic opportunity for all. I hope you'll join me in committing to this. And remember, we must mask up, we must vote up, and we must count up. Let's stand on the shoulders of those before and reach into the future. Our destiny is in our hands.
Do democracy. Vote.
You got it. Use it.
Vote. Demand democracy. Advocate for criminal, social, and environmental justice for all.
Engage in democracy.
Run for office.
You can be mayor, governor, president. Just run.
Democracy is powered by people like you and me.
Vote. Advocate, engage. Visit naacp.org or text DEMAND to 40649 for more information.
Thank you, gentlemen, for those powerful words. We will take them to heart. Next up are words of inspiration from the head of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, Cheryl Lynn Eiffel, David Johns with the National Black Justice Coalition, and from the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, Ms. Vanita Gupta. But first, a video by Gabby Wilson, the artist known as Her. In an interview, she said the lyrics for her song I Can't Breathe were easy to write because it came from a conversation of what's happening right now, what's been happening, and the change that we need to see. Ladies and gentlemen, her.
At the same time, all the corruption and justice, the same crimes. Always a problem if we do or don't fight and we die. We don't have the same right. What is a gun to a man that surrenders? What's it gonna take for someone to defend her? If we all agree that we're equal as people, then why can't we see what is evil? I can't breathe. You're taking my life from me. I can't breathe. Will anyone fight for me? How do we cope when we don't love each other? Where is the hope and the empathy? How do we judge off the color? The structure was made to make us the enemy. Praying for change cause the pain makes you tender. All of the names you refuse to remember, but somebody's brother, friend, or son to a mother that's crying, saying, I can't breathe. You're taking my life from me. I can't breathe. Will anyone fight for me? Anyone fight for me?
Trying times all the time. Destruction of minds, bodies, and human rights. Stripped of bloodlines, whipped and confined. This is the American pride. It's justifying a genocide, romanticizing the theft and bloodshed that made America the land of the free. To take a black life, land of the free, to bring a gun to a peaceful fight for civil rights. You are desensitized to pulling triggers on innocent lives because that's how we got here in the first place. These wounds sink deeper than the bullet your entitled hands could ever reach. Generations and generations of pain, fear, and anxiety. Equality is walking without intuition, saying the protector and the killer is wearing the same uniform. The revolution is not televised. Media perception is forced down the throats of closed minds, so it's lies in the headlines and generations of supremacy resulting in your ignorant, privileged eyes. We breathe the same and we bleed the same, but still we don't see the same. Be thankful we are God-fearing because we do not seek revenge. We seek justice. We are past fear. We are fed up eating your because you think your so-called black friend validates your wokeness and erases your racism. That kind of uncomfortable conversation is too hard for your trust fund pockets to swallow the strange fruit hanging from my family tree because of your audacity to say all men are created equal in the eyes of God, but disparage a man based on the color of his skin. Do not say you do not see color. When you see us, we can't breathe.
Hi, I'm Sherilyn Eiffel, President and Director Counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the nation's premier civil rights legal organization. We've been fighting for racial justice and equality in the courts since we were founded by Thurgood Marshall in 1940. It is my privilege and honor to join you in commemorating the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington, that great gathering for jobs and freedom. I want to thank my colleague, the Reverend Al Sharpton, and the National Action Network for organizing the march this year under the theme Commitment. Commitment is what we will need to fight against violent white supremacy, to fight against police violence against unarmed African Americans, to fight against voter suppression, and to fight against educational and economic inequality. This year, the premier way in which we express our commitment to our own liberation must be by exercising our right to vote. And in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, we will need to prepare to vote. That means if we intend to vote absentee, we should order our absentee ballots today, fill them out, and send them back in to be sure that they will be counted in time. If we plan to vote in person, we should find out when early voting begins in our jurisdiction so that we can take advantage of early voting. And if we intend to vote in person, either through early voting or on election day, we must vote safely. That means having a mask and having gloves. Most importantly, voting this year requires our full commitment. And that means voting for every race on the ballot, from the sheriff to the school board to the judge to the president. We should leave no power on the table. We should exercise all of the authority that we have to influence those who will control our lives. But we're asking for even more this year. We're asking for you to volunteer to serve as a poll worker if you are able, so that we can ensure that as many polls are open as possible. I'm grateful to all of you who are standing with us in this fight for justice and equality. We lift up and honor the memory of our great hero, Representative John Lewis. He told us to vote like never before. And in his name, and in the name of Reverend C.T. Vivian and Fannie Lou Hamer and Amelia Boynton, we stand together this year, linked arm in arm, determined to use our full power to control the lives of those in our communities and to ensure a better future for our children and our grandchildren. On behalf of the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, I salute you, and I'm proud to stand with you.
Greetings. My name is David Johns, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Black Justice Coalition. For those of you who have not yet had the pleasure of meeting, NBJC is the nation's only civil rights organization, both intentional and unapologetic, and standing at the intersection between racial equity and LGBTQIA+ equality. What we know is that as long as there have been Black people before the terms gay and lesbian existed, there were Black queer, Black trans, and Black non-binary folks. Somé says that the word was gatekeeper. That was the word that was used in her village on our continent of Africa. What we also know is the lesson that Fannie Lou Hamer taught us some time ago, which is that unless and until all of us are free, none of us are free. And in this particular moment, today, at this NAACP-sponsored virtual March on Washington, we celebrate acknowledging that there are some members of our community who have intersectional identities, that there's some Black people who are also living with a disability, who are members of a minority community because of sexual identity, gender orientation, or expression. There's some of us who are Afro-Latinx and Afro-Caribbean, and these nuances, these unique parts of our identities and experience are too often erased and ignored. I want to celebrate everyone who is doing the work to hold space for every member of our community. I want to say thank you to everyone who is doing the tough work required to cede some of the power that we hold in Black institutions, in Black spaces, and in Black communities, to give it to Black trans, Black queer, and Black non-binary leaders who are often at the forefront of this work to ensure that all Black lives matter. And I want to encourage anyone who is looking for a source of support or an ally in shifting to do more to ensure that all of us are free, considers me and NBJC a partner in that work. I hope you all have a great day and celebrate today knowing that tomorrow the work continues, so that soon all of us will be free.
I'm Vinita Gupta, President and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. the nation's oldest and largest civil rights coalition that played a key role in organizing the 1963 March on Washington. 95 days ago, George Floyd was murdered at the hands of 4 Minneapolis police officers, putting the issue of police brutality back in the national spotlight and enraging our country in a way not seen since the marches and uprisings of the civil rights era. Now, as we commemorate the 1963 March on Washington, this moment calls for a reckoning with how we have addressed public safety in our communities over the last several decades. Our nation has to envision a new paradigm for public safety that respects the human rights and dignity of all. That means not just changing policing practices and policies, but shrinking the footprint of the criminal legal system in Black and brown people's lives. It means shifting our approach away from the almost exclusive investments in the criminal legal system infrastructure toward investments in economic opportunity, education, healthcare, and other public benefits. We have to pass the Justice in Policing Act and go beyond it too. And of course, none of this is happening in isolation. As the American public cries out for justice, a public health emergency has upended all of our lives, though it hasn't affected everyone equally. The confluence of these two pandemics, structural racism on the one hand and COVID-19 on the other, along with a looming election in which one candidate has declared a war on our democracy, make this moment entirely unique. That is why it's up to us to fight back and save our fragile democracy. No one can sit on the sidelines. First, we all have the right to be counted in the 2020 census, and we need to be counted. Our power depends on it. We have limited time, and the impact is going to last the next decade. So if you haven't already, fill yours out today at 2020census.gov. Next, we have to make sure that every single one of us is registered to vote. We have to double check that our registration is updated and make a plan to vote early. Vote.org has everything you need. We've got to get active right now to make sure that we have all the information we need to vote early and show up. And if you can, consider signing up as a poll worker at powerthepolls.org. Finally, we've got to stay vigilant and keep up the pressure in our fight to save the U.S. Postal Service when we have an election amid a pandemic when voting by mail will be so crucial. We've got to protect it from partisan attempts to undermine its integrity. With fewer than 70 days until the election, we all have a role to play in our fight for democracy. And the truth is this: too much is at stake to remain silent. The America that we work toward every day, one where our rights are protected and our communities thrive, is on the line. As the 1963 March on Washington's youngest speaker, the late John Lewis, said, "The right to vote is precious, almost sacred. It is the most powerful nonviolent tool or instrument that we have in a democratic society. Use it." We have to honor Congressman Lewis and vote this year because our voices and our votes have power. And then we need to continue the hard work of building an America as good as its ideals, a nation where justice, equality, and fairness prevail. The civil and human rights community won't stop until we get there. Thank you. Stay safe.
Hi, have you been counted in the 2020 census?
Census numbers are used to determine federal funds for programs you and I care about,
like money for schools, roads, and hospitals.
These numbers are also used to define district lines that influence who
represents us in the halls of power.
So get counted for the 2020 census.
I'm counting on you.
Visit naacp.org
for more information.
I'm feeling so inspired, and we are just getting started. As President Johnson said, the importance of this moment must become a movement to the polls, a movement to affect change. Next up is a special performance from Studio B in New Orleans, Louisiana, featuring PJ Morton, Tank, and the Bangers, Sonny Patterson, DJ Manny Fresh, and the New Orleans Brass Band. Followed by greetings from Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, words of inspiration from Dr. Jamal Bryant, and representing the 29th District of Texas, Representative Sylvia Garcia. Let's head to New Orleans.
Peace, my name is Brandon B. Mike Odoms. I'm a visual artist. We are live in New Orleans at my home Studio B. I'm going to be creating a special piece for this gathering, and I cannot paint without music, so we put together this very special playlist of some of my favorite creatives in New Orleans. Let's get into it.
I know it's been so hard and you don't know what it all means. But don't you ever let go. See, there's a reason you're still standing after all you've seen. But don't you ever let go. Don't let go. Don't let go. Please just don't ever let go.
And when they read of this moment, they will see how we endured, and they will wonder how we made it, how we could live through such a time and still smile and create and celebrate, even though walls of panic and loss continue to build up around us. They will shake their heads in astonishment. They will question how we could survive without hugs and second lines and community gatherings. Or when they read, they will see how we were forced to grow our courage and practice care in the midst of grief. When they research about these days, from the uprisings to the downfalls, they will unravel the knots and connect the dots, and they too will heed the call, and they will know, because they will feel the power and presence of devotion and will, of culture, of spirit, of justice, of light, of oneness, of harmony, of divinity and insight. Or when they read of this moment, they will see how we endured, and they will still question how we made it. And we will say, well, how could we not?
DJ Manny Fresh. We from the city where they rap that B. It's better known as that B-E-A-T. We from the city where they rap that B. It's better known as that B-E-A-T. 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 Yaka, 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 want you yaka for me. B-E-A-T. B-E-A-T. Yaka, 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 want you drop for me. Drop for me. Drop for me. Drop for me. I want you rock to the beat. Yaka, 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 yaka. Rocka, 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 rocka. Rocka, 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 rocka.
Rally round and get the truth. Food stamps and work crews. Get your shoes, get your dues. We've been in policy and making news. Who I am, this is how it all begins. Come together, bring a friend, listening to comprehend. Ooh, no half steps getting there. No half steps up the stairs. No claps for going well. What you want applause for? What's a rainbow without its color? I can't have one without the other. I can't sit back and sit and wonder, but what of each other? What of each other? Look, we have a way to go. We have a way to go. We don't know how we'll get there, but we have a way to go. We have a way to go. We have a way to go. We don't know how we'll get there, but our steps will let us know. We have a way to go. We have a way to go. We don't know how we'll get there, but our steps will let us know. What of each other, yeah, 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 yeah. What of each other, yeah, 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 yeah. What of of each other? What of each other? Listen, look, I'm feeling lost inside, feeling numb and feeling inside, but there's a fire down the street and it's heading to my house. Now the block is hood, full of heat. Now the cops are coming out. Should I help my neighbor? Am I putting me in danger? Look, no half steps up the stairs, no steps for going there, no claps for going where.
As Speaker of the House, I am honored to send greetings on behalf of House Democrats to the activists and advocates, organizers and mobilizers, protesters and patriotic Americans virtually participating in this year's March on Washington. I am proud that I was there for part of the march 57 years ago. During that march, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a young John Lewis, and other titans of the civil rights movement came to Washington to insist on the truth that our nation must live up to its ideals. Today, millions of Americans from every corner of the country have taken up their fight in the face of vast injustice, from the police brutality killing hundreds of Black Americans, to the voter suppression silencing the voice of millions, to the disparities in health that are devastating communities of color, to the economic and environmental injustice that is harming so many. This year, for the first time, we joined the March on Washington without our spiritual guide, the conscience of the Congress, John Lewis. One of the youngest leaders of the Freedom Rides, March on Washington, and March to Montgomery, John understood the power of young people to change the future. John would often say, a young person should be speaking out for what is fair, what is just, what is right. Speak out for those who have been left out and left behind. That is how the movement goes on. Thanks to the activism of countless young people, thanks to so many of you, the movement for justice goes on, taking our nation ever closer to the more perfect union for which John sacrificed and fought. To honor John Lewis and the other heroes who were beaten, bloodied, and killed in the fight for civil rights, to honor George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Jacob Blake, who were most recently attacked, and hundreds of other Black Americans harmed and murdered because of who they are, and to honor every single child who deserves to grow up in an America where our values of freedom, fairness, equality, and justice are upheld. We must keep up the fight, and as John Lewis would say, find a way to get in the way.
His truth is marching on. Who else but the nation's oldest, largest, strongest, and baddest civil rights organization would change the game in the middle of a pandemic? I am so grateful for the leadership of our President, Derrick Johnson, for forward thinking that in the middle of COVID-19, we cannot quarantine our passion and our thirst for justice. And so I'm glad to be marching virtually with you on this day, believing that the next generation will not have to inherit the previous generation's mark of injustice. Something is getting ready to shift. And while we are marching virtually on this day, please, whatever you do, keep on marching until November 3rd, because we understand our vote is our voice. For those of you who've been saying, I'm tired of marching, the good news is you ain't got to do nothing but stay tuned in right here, because the change is going to happen whether the opposition likes it or not. I'm excited because we're going forward ever and backwards never.
Hi, this is Houston Congresswoman Sylvia Garcia with a message in commemoration of the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington. 57 years ago, America and the world watched in awe as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his powerful "I Have a Dream" speech. It was a day that forced America to grapple with the stain of slavery and the Jim Crow era, but also filled us with hope and optimism for what could be. We all got to see a glimpse of an America when one day we were not judged by the color of our skin, but by the content of our character. We were able to envision an America that would one day live up to its values of freedom and justice for all. And yet, we still have not fulfilled America's promise. There are forces today that are hell-bent on keeping their knees on the necks of Black and brown Americans. There are people today who would rather sow division and hate instead of inclusivity and full equality for all. This is not who we are as a country, and we must appeal to our better angels. So, as we all march physically and virtually today, let us recommit ourselves to getting into good trouble in the honor of John Lewis's memory. Let us create an America that recognizes that Black lives matter and that ensures equal justice under the law for everyone. Thank you, and God bless.
All I can say is wow. That performance from Studio B was everything. And that art, wow. Now it's time to hear from a few more women in the movement. We have a performance from Lisa Ramey, who was on season 16 of The Voice. Words of inspiration from NAACP Image Awards nominees Roxanne Taylor and Cheryl Underwood, the president and CEO of the Ms. Foundation, Teresa Younger, and my friend Stacey Abrams, who actually has a documentary on voter suppression being released next month. Please welcome Lisa Ramey.
Just got stronger. Let's get away from here, anywhere but here. Slip away with me into the night. Let's get lost. I'm the boss. Follow me. Run away with me. I'm hoping then you'll see. I'm feeling myself. It's something that I can't help tonight. Get on board with my vibe. I'll make you feel good inside. Alright, let me look at you. No taking eyes off you. The night allows the stars to shine. Your eyes open wide. Can't get a hold of myself. It's something crazy I felt. The stars align. Now you're all mine, and my eyes open wide. Oh yeah. It's simple to me to get to heaven. It's you. I'll cater to you, I'll host all night. Can't wait to learn about you. I wanna see how you'll do tonight. Alright, now let me look at you. No taking eyes off you. The night allows the stars to shine. Your eyes open wide. Can't get a hold of myself. It's something crazy I felt. The stars align. Now you're all mine, and my eyes open wide.
Hi, I'm Roxanne Taylor with Be Woke Vote, and this week we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, which granted white women the right to vote. It was passed into law by a margin of just one vote. It was the culmination of decades of advocacy from thousands of women. But there are women that got left out of this story that we must recognize. These women of color were at the forefront of this fight, despite the fact that this milestone did not even include them. They fought alongside white women, despite the fact that white women did not fight for them. These heroes of the movement understood that fighting for human rights is the most important thing that we can do. Their names should not just surface one day of the year. On this anniversary, they should be taught in schools and studied as our heroes. Ladies, today it's our turn. It's time to show up. It's time to be woke. It's time to vote. Ladies, be woke, vote.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Underwood. You probably recognize my face from watching me on television and my voice from hearing me on radio. But what I want you to know about me, I'm a life member of the NAACP. I'm also the 23rd International President of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. 57 years ago, our brothers of Phi Beta Sigma, the Honorable A. Philip Randolph and the Honorable John R. Lewis, came together with the NAACP, other civil rights organizations, labor unions, churches, faiths, and all of Black Greekdom for the 1963 March on Washington. During Zeta Centennial Year 2020, we come together again to do good in the neighborhood, asking everyone to fill out their census forms, and for the soul of the nation, take souls to the polls. We ask that you turn up the turnout. You have to vote like our lives depend on it, because they do. Matter of fact, I'm asking you to go blue. Be loud, united, and engaged. And I'd like to thank the NAACP for always keeping our eyes on the prize. And on behalf of the 511 affiliates of Cheryl Underwood Radio, we're going to do our part under BlackRadioSolidarity.com. We are going to get the word out, because we know that you won't know what to do until you hear it on Black radio and read it in a Black newspaper. In '63, the brothers and sisters came together to congregate. In 2020, we come together to commemorate the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington with this virtual gathering. And we know that we can't be together physically, but the NAACP is always there to fight for freedom, justice, and equality. The NAACP stands side by side with our brothers and sisters who are peacefully protesting in the streets, risking their lives during this pandemic in the fight for freedom, justice, and equality. And we know that the NAACP stands ready to go into court to fight voter fraud and systemic racism wherever they find it. And we stand with you, NAACP. And together we will fight on until victory is won.
It's no secret that Black women have been in the front lines of social justice movements throughout history. We are, at our core, freedom fighters. From suffrage to civil rights, the first March on Washington to the Women's March, and now with Black Lives Matter. From Shirley Chisholm to Ayanna Pressley and Kamala Harris, Ida B. Wells to Coretta Scott King and Alicia Garza. Marsha P. Johnson to Toni Michelle Williams and Raquel Willis. Black women's leadership is a powerful force. But despite these contributions, our efforts are largely unsung, and they are woefully underfunded. From approximately $70 billion in charitable grants distributed each year, only $5.48 is allocated to each woman and girl of color in this country. And we know that Black women and girls are only getting a portion of that allocation. And yet, we have been able to achieve so much. Imagine what we could do with more. Imagine what we could do if those with power, privilege, and platforms went beyond ineffective social media posts and lip service. At the Ms. Foundation for Women, We believe that power and possibility are not limited to gender, race, class, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, or age. We believe that equity and inclusion are the cornerstones of a true democracy in which the worth and dignity of every person are valued. For us, this starts with investing in and supporting Black women and girls. Throughout history, we have shown up for this country, and now we are asking this country to show up for us. We are calling on this country to show up for Black women, for Black girls, for our Black trans siblings, because our lives matter, because our leadership is essential to the success of this democracy.
In 1993, I joined the 30th anniversary of the March on Washington as a young activist and a student at Spelman College. It was there in that space of learning that began with the education of newly freed Black women that I understood most profoundly how Black women have powered movements to ensure that our nation lived up to its highest ideals. From gaining women's suffrage to the civil rights movement to Black Lives Matter, Black women have lifted their voices and put their bodies on the line in the fight for liberation, often with little recognition. Throughout much of the suffrage movement, white suffragettes cast aside Black women like Sojourner Truth, Ida B. Wells, and Mary Church Terrell in order to gain support from white men and Southerners. And despite the leadership of women such as Anna Arnold Hedgeman and Dorothy Height, who were essential to organizing the 1963 March on Washington, these powerful women were excluded from speaking during the program. We can and should celebrate the centennial of the 19th Amendment, the 150-year history of the 15th Amendment, and the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington, but we must do so with a tacit acknowledgement of the complex nature of progress. Black women fought for victories they would not enjoy and achieved freedoms they were denied. For too long in our history, we have battled sexism within a fight against racial injustice and racism embedded in the fight against gender discrimination. Yet the most profound honor we can offer the Truths and Wells and Heights and Hamers of America is to cultivate the next generation, to speak honestly of the shortcomings of our past, and to let them lead as we build a new movement to create the racial justice that mourns Breonna Taylor and Mercy Mack and Brayla Stone. Progress led by a dynamic group of young leaders who champion the rights of the disadvantaged, the marginalized, and the oppressed, regardless of class. We have made significant gains from our nation's founding, but we know that progress is not absolute. We must continue to work for it. While white women gained the right to vote 100 years ago, Black women did not secure the right to vote until the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This omission is a testament to the discrimination that exists in our nation, but the restoration of the Voting Rights Act will be a testament to the fortitude of our people. Our commitment must be to connect our principles to our power, to connect our protest to our power, to connect our people to our power. We are patriots, ones who marched for suffrage and for civil rights, ones who will not be silenced by slavery or Jim Crow or COVID-19. We will challenge our leaders to tackle criminal justice reform with the next steps. And we will vote for state legislators who will speak of reproductive justice and Black mothers' survival. We will be counted in the census, and we will draw lines of redistricting that tie us together, not split us apart. Together, we will replace the power mongers with those who know we are strongest with shared power, voting power, people power. We will center the voices and activism of Black women by electing them to lead and standing together in the struggles to come. We will seek out coalitions of compassion, and we will deny those who would divide us from one another. We stand as one, blending our diversity into a tapestry of change, and together we will win.
Thank you, ladies. What's up next? The women of the movement. During the modern civil rights movement from 1954 to the signing of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, Black women played a pivotal role marching, boycotting, and moving America towards justice. Overshadowed by the men involved in the movement and overlooked by the media, the dominant roles women played are often absent in history books. Well, we'd like to share a short documentary to tell you a portion of their story. Women of the Movement, Moving Towards Justice. Now, this documentary illustrates some of the women who tenaciously worked behind the scenes and beside the big six leaders, paving the way for justice and equality for all. Immediately following the short is a powerful conversation moderated by Erin Haynes between a few women who are currently on the front lines, like Dr. Janetta Cole, Bishop Leah Dowtry, Tamika Mallory, and Portia Williams. Please enjoy the documentary and conversation, followed by a special performance from soulful singer Macy Gray.
She was ignored, overlooked, forgotten, and visibly invisible. But not anymore. See her, hear her, know her story. The modern civil rights movement flame was lit on May 17, 1954, when the Supreme Court declared that separate but equal unconstitutional. But the fire flared on August 28, 1954, when Emmett Till was murdered.
I've worked for the NAACP since 1954. It is the only position I have had since I graduated from college and got my master's degree. I've worked in many different divisions over 6 decades. There has been a long list of women who have been stalwarts in the NAACP. Women have special skills for detailed and perseverance. And they also are sensitive to the inequities of our society, the way that they are treated. There is a special empathy on the part of a female as a result of our own individual experience of being denied certain privileges, which are really our right to have. We have been treated over the years as subordinate to the male counterpart in our society, and have had to fight to secure the opening of doors, which automatically, in many instances, are opened for men. So the special sensitivity that women have based on their own experience is translated into action and devotion to the cause of civil rights, not only for themselves, but to open the doors wider for others and the generations to come along behind them.
I grew up in segregated schools, and I know we did not have what the white kids had, but it was very important that we would integrate so that things would be equal, so that we could have access to the resources. And I guess I go back to Daisy Bates and what she did during those very early days, because she was not an educator. She was a staunch member of the NAACP. She was a strong advocate for women's rights, and she was a strong advocate for education. She was state president of the NAACP. The NAACP lawyers like Wally Branton and Tate and others went in to help her in the movement. But it wasn't until Eisenhower really sent in the Arkansas National Guard and asked the Department of Defense to enforce the integration of the schools. And that's kind of in a capsule of the Little Rock Nine. There's some other women too who were strong advocates for education. One of them was Septima Clark, who is considered the queen mother of the civil rights movement. And she worked at a school called Promised Land in South Carolina. When they found out that she was a member of the NAACP or had joined the NAACP, the South Carolina legislature said teachers couldn't work in their schools if they joined the NAACP. And so she was not giving up her membership in the NAACP. She left South Carolina and went to Tennessee. And during the summers, she taught people like Rosa Parks and others of them in special programs. And finally, she left and went to Atlanta and set up a school called Dorchester Center. When she left Atlanta, she went to Chicago and continued to teach. But September Clark was considered by many to be the queen mother of the civil rights movement. Well, there were little girls in the movement, and they're overlooked. A lot of people overlooked. You know, I could name Diane Nash, who is an unsung hero, who was very much a younger woman, who was very much involved in setting up SNCC, a freedom rider. She marched in 1963. She's what I would call an unsung hero because we don't hear her name as much today as we should hear it. And all of the little girls who were involved were children out there. Many people, we don't bring that up to history in terms of history.
I was a junior member of the NAACP and the National Council of Negro Women when I was 13 years of age. And that was all I heard about was Mary McLeod Bethune and Dorothy Height and what they were trying to do to advance the cause of African American women. When I had the opportunity to meet her, I learned so much, and I loved all the stories she used to tell me about being the only woman as a member of the Big Six civil rights movement and leadership. I particularly loved the stories that she would tell when she would try to bring the perception of women into the conversation. So much so that when they had the March on Washington, the planning of that march in 1963, the women, of course, were not on the program. And she really argued for women to be a part of the program. And she would go on to tell the stories of how the program came together. And in particular, it was the women, several hundred of them, who gathered at the offices of the National Council of Negro Women that day. And they marched from the offices of the National Council of Negro Women to join the thousands, literally, that were a part of the march that day. And as they ended the march, she said there was so much that came out of it that they made a decision for the women who did not get to participate to meet the next day. And so the next day they had a conference. It was so powerful. The women talked about childcare. They talked about affordable housing. They talked about education and the conditions of our schools. And they talked about jobs, the work that we as Black women also needed. So they were able to expand that conversation. And she talked a lot about Pauli Murray, a brilliant lawyer, who actually wrote the paper, she said, on the voices of women who were excluded that day from the march. She documented that experience for all of them. So when Dorothy Height talked about the march, she didn't just talk about August 28th. She also talked about August the 29th, when the voices of women came to the table.
For 400 years, Black women have fought against racism. Ella Baker, Fatima Clark, Merle Evers, Ruby Hurley, Joyce and Dory Ladner, Clara Luper, Fannie Lou Hamer, Ruby Bridges, Joanne Robinson, Pauli Murray, Lula B. White, Linda Brown, Mamie Till, and many more continue moving toward justice.
Hello, my name is Erin Haynes, and I'm editor-at-large of The 19th, a nonprofit, nonpartisan newsroom focused on the intersection of gender, politics, and policy. It is my privilege to moderate today's urgent and timely conversation, which is part of the commemoration of the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington. The NAACP, National Action Network, Martin Luther King III, and a coalition of civil rights and social justice leaders will be leading a March on Washington, both physically and virtually, on August 27th and 28th. As the Black community simultaneously battles two pandemics, the outbreak of the coronavirus and the resurgence of Jim Crow-era racism, we bear witness to the birth of a new civil rights movement that centers the Black community and the Black agenda. Organizations like these are counting on everyone to help build the nation that Black Americans deserve. And it is critical that we hear from leaders and emerging voices in this moment, including the Black women leading movements that have always been central to our fight for justice and equality, which brings us to today's discussion. Even in the most turbulent times, Black women have found a way to give voice to the most vulnerable in a society that has valued patriarchy and whiteness as a foundational structure. From the abolition movement to the civil rights movement to the current movement for social justice in the leadership and sacrifice of Black women, at times that contribution has been underestimated. And so as we mark this 57th anniversary of the March on Washington, leading Black women are going to have a candid conversation today about the challenge, inspiration, and hope in the struggle for freedom, justice, and inequality. So I'll introduce our panelists before we get started. Dr. Janetta Betch-Cole is a noted educator, author, speaker, and consultant on diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion in educational institutions, museums, and workplaces. She currently serves as the 7th president and chair of the board for the National Council of Negro Women. After receiving a PhD in anthropology, Dr. Cole held teaching positions in anthropology, women's studies, and African American studies at several colleges and universities. She served as president of both historically Black colleges for women in the United States, Spelman College and Bennett College, a distinction she alone holds. She also served as the director of the Smithsonian National Museum of African Art, as a principal consultant at Cook-Ross, and as a senior consulting fellow at the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. Next, we have the Reverend Leah D. Daughtry, a nationally recognized organizer, activist, political strategist, author, and faith leader. Bishop Daughtry serves as the presiding prelate of the House of the Lord churches. Standing at the intersection of faith and politics, she works with community activists and organizations, political entities, business and faith leaders, and communities to assist them in building coalitions and partnerships that advance the common good. Reverend Daughtry has previously served as Chief of Staff at the U.S. Department of Labor, Chief of Staff of the Democratic Party, as well as Chief Executive Officer of both the 2008 and 2016 Democratic National Conventions, making her the only person in Democratic Party history to hold that position twice. Reverend Daughtry is the co-author, along with Donna Brazile, Yolanda Caraway, and Mignon Moore, of the NAACP Image Award winning For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Politics. A graduate of Dartmouth College and Wesley Theological Seminary, she is a native of Brooklyn, New York. Next is Tamika D. Mallory, an activist and the founder of Mallory Consulting, as well as the national co-chair for the Women's March. Tamika is an advocate for stronger gun restrictions, equal rights for women, healthcare, and ethical police conduct. As president of Mallory Consulting, a strategic planning and event management firm, Tamika has worked with Fortune 500 companies and corporations on flagship projects related to mass incarceration, gun violence, and police brutality. She has made the fight for equity her life's work, and she continues this work as a board member of the Gathering for Justice organization and as an active constituent of the Justice League NYC. And last but certainly not least, Portia Williams, a multi-talented television host, media personality, and influencer filled with big dreams and the ambition to make them a reality. A true cornbread-fed Georgia peach, Portia was born and raised into a prominent and historic family in Atlanta, as she is the granddaughter of civil rights leader and philanthropist, the Reverend Hosea Williams. Portia remains heavily involved in her various charity partnerships and is proud mother to her baby daughter, Pilar. Not only is Portia one of the stars of Bravo's #1 show, The Real Housewives of Atlanta, but she is also the star of her own highly rated spinoff special, Portia's Having a Baby, which covered her incredible journey of pregnancy and motherhood. She is also co-host of the nationally syndicated talk show Dish Nation and has co-starred alongside Vivica A. Fox and Columbus Short in the onstage remake of Two Can Play That Game. Portia's in the process of writing her debut book entitled The Pursuit of Portia. Thank you so much, ladies, for joining me for this very important conversation. I want to start by really just reflecting on our current moment. The unarmed shootings and killings of Black people in this country have continued unabated in the midst of the coronavirus crisis. I'm wondering, and we can start with you, Tamika, what are your thoughts on the toll that this has taken on Black Americans collectively in the midst of this pandemic, and really how we're responding as a community and as an electorate this year?
I think we're in a perpetual state of trauma, rage, frustration. In some people, there may be a sense of hopelessness. And I think that, all those feelings make up the Black experience in this moment. People are feeling all different types of things. But what I will say is that even with all of the pain, what you see happening across the country where people are organizing, where it's an intergenerational fight that has really spilled onto our streets. Folks are coming together from all different backgrounds, all different races, all different belief systems to try to, first of all, to push for change, to raise our voices, and to stand alongside other, as we like to call them, accomplices. I think that gives you a real sense of this idea that being hurt, being frustrated, does not mean you're broken to the point that you do not continue to stand up for what you believe in. Sorry. I think we're living in a moment where we're living in a crazy moment, but it also is a place where it's like labor pains. It's very difficult. The labor process hurts. It's painful, but there is something beautiful that I see coming because we know that people are involved in this movement that have not been feeling as if they had a place or even understanding why they needed to be at the table before.
Yeah, I want to get into that conversation about accomplices a little later, but Reverend Daughtry, I'm wondering what you think about that.
I think that we are standing at an intersection. As Tamika just referenced, Black people are and continue to be under siege from all sides, whether it is the lawlessness that we are experiencing from law enforcement officials, whether it is our health in this pandemic environment, whether it is the disparity we are seeing in lending, in education, in access to the internet. Our lives at many times, most times, feel under siege and we don't know where to find safety. So we stand at this intersection of hopelessness and at the same time, hopefulness when we see so many Black women, since we're talking about women's power today, Black women running for office, winning office. The mayors of nearly every major city in America are African American women. We now have an African American woman on top of the ticket as the vice presidential nominee. We have Black women in business as business leaders, leading colleges and universities. So it's an interesting time that we are trying to navigate our way through, where we celebrate the achievements, the accomplishments, and the hope, but still try to navigate through the trauma we experience on our way to the hopefulness. So it is, as Tamika said, a challenge for us, and can be a challenge to our mental health, to our well-being, as we almost live in this state of schizophrenia. We don't know what to feel on any given day. But we're strong and resilient, and so we push our way through despite the pain, but that's really not a healthy place to be either.
Right. Dr. Cole, I'm wondering, as an educator who has helped to grow, a lot of the Black women's leadership that we have seen in this country, how you see Black women really responding to this moment, and how they are part of kind of that long history and legacy of rising to the occasion in times of crisis for the community.
Mika has said her image, I could see it and I could feel it, the pain of birthing, and yet the possibility of that birth being realized. And of course, Bishop Leah giving us that intersection of hopefulness and hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
You asked about Black women. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Particularly because you asked about Black women. I want to speak about duality. Duality. Lack of hope and hope. Birthing pains and the birth. Black women have known duality for 401 years since we indeed, with Black men, were forced ashore as an enslaved people. We have known systemic racism, but we've known no less systemic sexism. And that duality is so chiseled into the way that we are responded to. And yet, despite that double jeopardy, that duality of systemic oppression, Black women continue to rise. And when we look across these 401 years, we see unending struggle by Black women, so seldom fully recognized when we talk about the heroes and forget to mention the sheroes of both the civil rights movement and the women's movement. So let me just bring a little closure on this by saying that I feel a sense of highly cautious optimism when things could not be worse in terms of the brutal assault on the lives of Black men and Black women. But as Tamika reminded us, look at the response. Never before have we seen protests of this number, way north of 25, 30 million people, people of every conceivable background. And so what we have to do as activists is to lean in. I'm sure Bishop Daughtry would say it, pray with our feet. Keep this movement going, a movement for the ultimate liberation of Black people.
Absolutely. Dr. Cole talked about, Portia, the duality of Black women. You are somebody that wears many hats, including the one you're wearing right now. But talk about, what pulled you into this work. I mean, obviously, as I mentioned, you come from a family that has a legacy of this kind of activism, and you are operating, for people who don't know, in that tradition.
I often talk about how, in my personal journey, I've been through different things in my life, and I've had to become different people for different situations. And I also had to live within situations and have my mind and my faith be forward and not be within my circumstance, but what I was looking forward to being. And I think that is the place that we all are in right now. I feel that over the years, we as African American women and men, mostly women, have been named a lot of different things. We've been told who we are, and labeled many different ways, criminal, a lot of it because of our skin, a lot of it just because of who we are. We've been stereotyped. We have been put in a system that is built to tear us down. But I think at this very moment, we are here to rise up and to become exactly who we need to be, which is the exact opposite of what everyone else has said. Me as a woman now, talking to other women who are wanting to be active, talking to other women who inspire me, who are active, I see a whole nother light in their eyes. And that light is and that's in their eye now is something that has to be there. It's something that we were actually born with. And I just feel like every woman that I have come in contact with has a knowing, and they absolutely have, that gift of discernment that we talk about in church. It has been activated in every woman. So any woman who I have talked to about the movement and what we're going to do, what we're sacrificing, because African Americans have always had to sacrifice. We have always had to give and take care of the white man, they child, our husband, our children, the community, raising a village, etc. Be friend, be mom, be this, be business person. Now, if you bring it now, we're independent woman. We the husband. We are everything in our households at this point. And we went through all of that for this very moment. And I feel that every woman I have come in contact with is able to tap into that pain, has been able to tap into those lessons that they didn't even realize they were possibly learning in order to be a part of this movement. So a lot of what I'm seeing in young people, a lot of what I'm seeing in women like myself who aren't afraid to sacrifice, they are willing to get out there and learn what needs to be done, educate themselves. And like I always say when it comes to voting, be an educated voter so that you are an effective voter. So what I'm seeing is a true breakthrough. At this moment, we also have to realize as women, we are very spiritual. We're in a spiritual warfare. And look, at our downtime, we in the house trying to make sure our families are safe, trying to make sure everything is good. Our spirits are beat down. We lightweight holding a little bit of depression because we don't know what's going to happen, but we're having to break through that and stand up and become who we need to be. We're having to actually call on our ancestors to have that power to fight against everything, fight against my fear, anxiety of being out here and, possible getting sick coronavirus. We are actually risking more than our lives. So anyone you see who is active right now, trust me, they have made one with themselves. They have decided to focus and sacrifice whatever they have to do so that our kids, our Black kids, our little Black girls, our little Black boys don't have to live in fear. So for me, when I hear people talk about the movement and how women are being active, we're doing what we've always done. This is why it's coming so natural to us. This is why it can't be shaken. It can't be moved. Naysayers, we don't care because we are so driven and divinely purposeful in what we're doing that everybody should be afraid of what's to come when it comes to the new movement, for sure.
Portia, you make so many good points and bring me really to the next thing that I want to ask you all about. And that is really the reality that Black women have always been doing the work, even though they may not have always gotten the credit. But something does feel different about this moment. I mean, I know that as a journalist who's been writing about so many of the Black women who have been doing this work for so long, but who were not always acknowledged. But I really do feel like this election cycle has really highlighted kind of the organizing and leadership prowess of Black women in a range of roles and really the strength of Black women as voters in a way that I really have not seen in the time that I've been covering politics. And so I think starting with you, Reverend Daughtry, why is that happening now, that recognition happening now after so many years of our labor, going unrecognized? And what does this moment say about where you think Black women's leadership is going from here?
Well, I think part of, it's hard to be what you can't see. And I think for Black women, we have reached a place in our trajectory in this country where we can see Black women, too many of them still the first, but we can see Black women in a variety of leadership roles. We're not just actresses, which is what we always saw. That was probably the only place you could see Black women was in the minimal roles that they had on screen. But now we have Black women on screen and behind the camera. We have Black women in the boardroom. We have Black women in Congress. We have Black women on the streets, in the activist world. We have Black women's leadership on full display. in every sector of American society. And when we can see each other and see leaders, and when little Black girls can turn on the television and see a news anchor that looks like them, see a Tamika Mallory, see a Ava DuVernay movie, it unleashes the possibility that may have just been a seed in their soul, but now can flower into a full tree. And because of that, we affirm each other, right?
Yeah,
So it's
that's
no
right.
longer just me in leadership. I can see Tamika and say, "Go, girl." I can see Portia and say, "That's me on the Real." I'm not on the Real Housewives, but Portia's on there, so I'm on there. I can see Dr. Cole. I can see me in all these different places, and it affirms who I am and gives us more power, more excitement, more energy, more inspiration to push more women forward, to push ourselves forward, to create more space for each other. And I think that's the trajectory we're on. There's no place to go but up. We are still in a place in this country, as well as we are doing, and now that we can see more of us, but there are still too many firsts. We're
That's
still
right.
breaking barriers. And until the time comes where there's no such thing as the first Black woman too,
Right.
then we've got work to do. Once we destroy that barrier, then perhaps we will be at the place we want to be. But until then, we got work to do, and that's where women's leadership is headed. Women are breaking barriers every single day. We have a Black woman who is now the Senate candidate in all places, Tennessee. Whoever would have thought it? We have Black women doing all kinds of things. It's exciting, it's inspiring, and it helps us to see ourselves, and it helps our daughters and our nieces and our granddaughters to see themselves and to dream even bigger than what we dreamed.
Yeah, and I think you make such a good point about, Black women leading in so many different ways, right? Showing people what is possible and really stretching this country's imagination around who we are and, frankly, where we belong. I think we know where we belong, but showing the rest of this country is something that is increasingly happening. And so, to that point, Tamika, I want to ask you really about the modern protest movement, which I think, doesn't necessarily look like what everybody necessarily expects or approves of, right? And you are somebody that's tapped into young people who are really at the center of this movement. Portia, you are somebody that people may recognize more for your role on Real Housewives than for your civil rights legacy and emerging activism. But I want to hear from both of you about whether you think that certain gatekeepers, deciding who gets to be a Black woman in leadership, or how that Black woman should be leading. Do you think that's a distraction from the work? And why do you think that it really does take a range of approaches as part of an overall strategy for action and change? Tamika, you can go first on this one.
Yeah, it absolutely takes a range of strategies. And there was a time when I would be very caught up in the conversation around the old guard versus the new guard, and and when will folks get up and give us a seat at the table. Sorry, so many people are calling, and that's just an unfortunate thing about being on the cell phone. I apologize. Um, but I used to get really caught up into that, the old guard versus the new guard. And then one day I realized that there's no such thing, that it's all a continuation. And I now am, especially now that I'm 40 and I'm mentoring so many other young people. I'm living in Kentucky on a temporary residency to fight for Breonna Taylor. And one of the things that was important was that I did not just move here along with the co-founders of Until Freedom without bringing along many of the young organizers across the country. We have folks here from Minneapolis, a young lady by the name of Leslie Redmond, who was on the ground in Minneapolis, helping to lead many of the activities, the protest movement there around George Floyd. Today, we were joined by Tiffany Lofton. Both of them are two of the great and bold NAACP. We have Tory Russell here, a young man who was on the ground in Ferguson. I think what's important, I'm going to stop there actually, because it comes to a great point. Tory Russell, he's a total abolitionist. He's, on the streets, very courageous young man. When you saw things, happening in Ferguson, the pain and struggle that young people went through on the ground, when many others, older folk and just people in general who did not necessarily want to be at the center of the tear gas and the rubber bullets, when they packed up and went home, people like Tori Russell were still out there on the front line. And it's been incredible to bring a Tori Russell together with a Tiffany Lofton and not that these folks don't know each other, but in the context of Breonna Taylor, to have different people from different backgrounds coming together so that we can learn from one another and take pieces from everyone's tactics and movement strategies so that it makes up the most robust and the strongest movement that we can have. Someone said today at a press conference that we did, in fact, it was Sadiqa Reynolds, the president of the Urban League of Louisville. She said, the reason why we need outside folks to come into cities and help to work with local grassroots organizers is because if any one of us could get it done alone, it would have been done. So the ways in which I am trying in my growth, and as I try to mature, instead of looking so much at the old guard stepping aside, I realized that we have to do the same thing that others have done, which is to build the tables and to prove ourselves as being worthy of the baton in this movement.
Yeah, yeah. And before I come to you, Portia, I just want to stay on this because you and Portia are on the ground in Louisville right now, fighting for, continuing to push for justice for Breonna Taylor. But that fight again doesn't look like what people maybe are used to. The idea of a BreonnaCon, for example, right? I mean, that's something that is definitely kind of outside the box, to say the least, in terms of the approach to getting people engaged, getting people involved. Talk about, how that speaks to kind of meeting the moment and meeting, the young folks who are at the center of this, how an approach like that really speaks directly to them.
There's been some controversy around the titles that were used for the different events. And I could take us down one road, which is to talk about how folks on the internet like to focus on titles and not be necessarily standing with us in the streets. Because guess what? We had an event called Tailor Made during BreonnaCon, and people were upset that Yandy Smith Harris, who's one of Love and Hip Hop stars, but also an entrepreneur, a great leader, and a board member of Until Freedom. We had her there. We had Portia there, and a number of other individuals. And people said, well, why do celebrities have to come? And first of all, that's nothing new. In every single movement, whether it be even Muhammad Ali, who was a celebrity but also an activist. James Brown was saying, I'm Black and I'm proud in his music. There's nothing new that we use the influence that some of our celebrities have to bring a flavor to the movement. And so while some people didn't like the idea of the use of the word BreonnaCon, which by the way, con stands for convention, it's, although I understand that the initial thing that you hear is sort of like Comic-Con or Comic Con, but there's also been a Politicon. There's also been a Justice Con. There's also Boss Con that is being led by Felicia Butterfield Jones this week. And those issues are not jokes. Our politics, justice for Black and brown people. I'm sure that Felicia Butterfield's conference, that she's going to be focusing on serious issues about business. And so as we move forward in society, we always begin to take some of popular culture and add it to the spices, the soup that makes up this movement. And what happened on Saturday when we had this event called Tailor Made, you had a bunch of young women who came. They were dressed up, Leah. They were ready. They were sexy. They were ready to get in because, they knew Portia was going to be there sexy, and they knew Yandy was going to be there sexy, and they showed up ready. You know what they told us? They've never been out to march and protest for Breonna, but they learned about Breonna's law, which is legislation that has been introduced here in Kentucky. And they learned what they need to do, the phone numbers that they need to call, the ways that they can push their legislators. Many of them showed up today. Today is 3 days later, and they still hanging out with us. And they're saying, show me the way, because we have to create new ways for people to get into this work. They're not, and I think that if what we are constantly, and I'm not gonna say anything else after this, but I think that, because I got to vent, because you obviously know what we've been up against, right? So I have to be able to say this. I think that if all we're doing is reaching the same people on the streets, Bishop, we're not doing our job. The goal is to figure out how to get Susie, who might be on a stripper pole at night, to also see herself in this work, so that when she gets to the movement and she shows up at a rally or some other event and feels like, is there a place for me here, that we're so welcoming, that we give her so much, that we edify her in such a way that that engineering career that she also wants to focus on, her nursing career, being a leader in the movement, that we help to guide her there without judgment. So I understand that it doesn't all look the same to everyone. It won't always sound the same, but Breonna Taylor, as her mother has said, they have been involved with the planning every step of the way of BreonnaCon, the different events, the different things that we did. And as she said, my daughter is not just a young lady who was killed. She was a young lady with a life before she died. And that life that she led is the life also of other Louisville residents that want to be in this movement just as we do, as protesters from all over the nation.
Yeah. Yeah. Portia, can I ask you to just add, the role of pop culture in getting involved in this movement and using the platform that you have to raise visibility about issues? I mean, Breonna Taylor feels like something that is very personal for you and that you are very passionate about.
Yes, I'm absolutely passionate about Breonna Taylor because I know that she was killed and she was an innocent woman and she had done nothing to deserve what happened to her as she laid at home in her bed. But I think the biggest thing when it comes to the movement and who is allowed to say and who's allowed to and how it's supposed to look, etc. Listen, in the beginning, back when my grandfather was in the movement and Martin Luther King, all of them, they were all from the church. Okay, in the church back in the day, what they did, they didn't turn anybody away. They used everybody. If you had hands, if you could do this, whatever it was, they'll clean you up, they'll teach you what you need to know, and they put you in your right position within the movement so that you could then be effective. That is the same mindset that these activists, such as Tamika Mallory and her entire Until Freedom, this is what they have. They're at the point to where they're not going to turn anybody away because we actually can't afford to turn anybody away. This is a moment where all hands need to be on deck. At any moment of any time of day, wherever I am, black, white, boy, girl, adult, grandmother, if there's a moment for me to be able to empower someone and tell them how they can be active, I'm going to take that moment and do it because right now it is do or die. Okay. The same way we're telling everybody they need to get up and they need to go and vote. Listen, if you don't go and vote, people say it's do or die. You might as well add your name to the hashtag. That is where we are. We are at dire times. We are at a time where mothers cannot be at home with their babies. Fathers are afraid to drive down the street. Parents are afraid to let their kids go get something from the store. We can't live like this. So you have to make a radical decision. You have to stand on it. You have to be focused, and you have to not care about what anybody has to say. Don't worry about the fact that anybody is trying to villainize the people who are actually making moves in the movement. If we stand still to talk to people who are having something to say about you in the movement, you're going to stop your movement. And that is not what we're here for. We are here for complete action by any means necessary is what we are here. This is do or die. So absolutely, we want to make sure these young people are empowered. If we see them doing something and we know that it could be damaging to the movement in a way that it can overpower or distract from the cause, like Breonna Taylor, if something was happening and someone was doing something and they were representing what we were doing, we will pull them to the side and we will tell them a better way to do it. But by no means will we be excluding anybody from the movement. And for me, when it comes to having the older activists and having your younger activists, you listen, the people who are saying that there should be division and it's really the old against the new, that is a myth. I want this to go away right now. That is a myth. Any one of us, Tamika, myself, any of these amazing people in the movement, we can pick up the phone and call anybody, any of the King's children. You can call anybody in my family, call anybody in any family, Andrew Young, you can call them. They are happy to get on the phone
Yes, to get
because
on the
what
phone.
we have as at our time, and I'll round this up, but what we have at this very moment is something they didn't have back then. We have the ability to use social media and touch millions of people in a moment. So what we need to do is make sure that everybody we come in contact with is educated and knows when they use their platform, 10 people, 10 million people, 5 million people, they need to have something to say that is going to push the movement forward. So at this moment, we absolutely need to include everybody who knows anything about social media, everybody who knows anything about campaigning. And no, it's not just the people who are on the ground and willing to be out in the heat, etc. Some people actually have anxiety. So we all were born with a particular gift. And trust me, this is the spiritual warfare we're in right now. So the gift that you have inside of you, you are able to use it for this movement. You just have to choose to. You have to understand that love is an action word. And that if you love people, if you love America, if you love other humans and believe in humanity, then it should activate what's in you to use your gift for the bigger purpose, to make sure that people like Breonna Taylor get justice, and to understand that when we fight for her, we're fighting for ourselves. That's really what we need to be focused on.
Yeah. I told you guys. I'm sorry,
If I
Leah,
can
were you
just,
going
if I can just piggyback a little bit on what Portia's saying, it is so important, and I want to lift up this point. There is room for everyone in these movements. And I know we're living in pandemic times, and there are some people who can't be outside, who can't march,
Right.
can't because they have health issues or they have family issues, they have concerns. That doesn't mean that there isn't something for you to do. There is something for each one of us to do. So Tamika was just referencing Breonna's law. If you can't be out in the street, you can still make phone calls. If you can't go out and register people to vote because you can't knock on doors, that's okay. There are many programs, vote.org and a whole lot of others that will allow you to connect people. Do not let the pandemic, or do not let social media keep you from being engaged. This is a time for us all to find our niche.
That's it.
Find the thing that we can do to help move this movement forward. It will look different for all of us, but that's okay. You gotta have an inside strategy and an outside strategy. There is something for you to do. Don't be dissuaded because you can't march. Don't be dissuaded because you don't have social media. Don't be dissuaded because you don't have a smartphone. There is something for you to do. There is room, as they say in the church, there is room at the altar for you. Find your place. Work that's going on.
Well, I definitely want to hear some more about that. Dr. Cole, I want to come to you, though, because I want to talk about something that is very near and dear to me. At the 19th, I work for a newsroom that is named for the 19th Amendment. And as you know, we celebrate, or marked, I should say, the milestone of the suffrage centennial just last week. And for people who don't know, the 19th Amendment was about access to the ballot primarily for white women, right? I mean, despite the reality that white women that black women stood shoulder to shoulder with white suffragists 100 years ago. And I wrote about the legacy of this dynamic and the reality, frankly, that black women have used their vote, which they have had for about half as long, to bring about a fairer and freer America, while white women have really largely used their vote over the past century to uphold systems of inequality. So, I wonder, Dr. Cole, if you can talk about where we are at the centennial of the 19th Amendment and the fact that black women are now leading from the front and where white women are in this fight. I mean, we're still fighting for the voting rights that we got, while they don't really seem to be in a battle for voting rights because they won theirs and kind of moved on.
Everything you said, my sister, I would say amen and a women too. But let me add this. The right to vote is one way to understand Black women and Black men and Black people. If we go back before the 19th, let's go back to the 15th Amendment, when supposedly anyone in the United States could vote, irregardless of race. And when that happened, If you think that black men, because by then women were not allowed to vote, were able to vote, read, feel your history. Because the moment that that was possible, what kicked in was the most brutal forms of racial terror that kept black men from being able to exercise the vote that they were supposed to have acquired. Mm-hmm. The same happened when we moved into the 19th Amendment. Just because it was written that no one could be denied the right to vote based on sex did not mean that black women got the vote. I'm absolutely forced to tell ever so quickly a story. The year was 1920 when that vote was possible for black women. And Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, the founder of the National Council of Negro Women, the president of Bethune-Cookman, a co-founder of the United Negro College Fund, was warned by a youngster that the Klan was on its way to Bethune-Cookman College. Dr. Bethune sent out the word to her faculty, her staff, her students. She said, all lights are out. And as the Klan rode onto her campus, the bell was rung. All lights went on, and the Klan left. I tell that as only one example of the intimidation, the racial violence, the lynching of black men, yes, and black women who dared to try to vote. Now, let me also add that in this suffragettes movement, there was unending racism. The individual most lifted up, of course, Susan B. Anthony, when the 15th Amendment was being discussed and coming down toward the 19th, she referred to black people as Sambos.
Yeah.
Right? Let's come down to 1913, when women of my sorority, Delta Sigma Theta sorority, recently founded as an organization, dared to march, to join the march in Washington, D.C., organized by suffragettes. Black sorority women were told to get to the back of the march.
Yeah.
Our great hero, Ida B. Wells, who of course led so many efforts against lynching, who was herself a great suffragette. Ida B. Wells came into D.C. from Chicago to march in that 1913 march. She was told she could not march with the Chicago delegation. Get to the back of the march. And so we as women need to remember that it is possible to be victimized on one basis, which white women experience. It's called sexism, and can turn around and victimize others on another basis. It's called racism. But I have to say this, I am, again, my language, cautiously optimistic that in this year's so-called celebration, I prefer to call it a commemoration, many groups, fundamentally white women's groups, are acknowledging the racism that was a part of the suffragettes movement. And while we're on it, racism was also there in the abolitionist movement. Now, what is the lesson for us today? It is the absolute power and necessity of the vote. I like to say this, anybody who is a Black American who refuses to go and vote, whether November 3rd for a state office or local positions, If you don't go and vote, it's my wish that the spirit of Fannie Lou Hamer, of Diane Nash, that the spirit of Ella Baker, that the spirit of a young Spelman alumna by the name of Ruby Doris Smith Robinson, that the spirit of the civil rights and women's rights movement will come down and haunt you. How dare we vote?
Wow. Well, I certainly think that is a good note to end this conversation on. But before I let everybody go, I'm just wondering for you other three of our panelists, your final thoughts on Black women's leadership and the moment that we are in to close us out. I will start with you, Reverend Daughtry.
We are in a critical moment in our nation, in our communities, as we look to the future. And this is a time for us as Black women to continue the tradition that we have established over our 400 plus years in this country of protecting and moving our communities forward. We don't have a sister to waste. This is a time for us to gather our sisters together, lock arms, and move forward. Our nation needs us. We cannot stand on the sidelines. We must take the power. And I don't like the term empowerment because it implies that someone is giving us power. Power is coming from someplace else. We've always had the power. The power lies within us, and it is a matter of us recognizing and walking in the power that God has given to us, the authority that comes to us by virtue of being daughters of the Most High God, and move with that authority and with that power to change what needs to be changed, to affirm what needs to be affirmed, and to tear down the things that need to be torn down. This is our moment, sisters. This is our time more than any other time in our history in this country. So let's get this done.
Portia, your final thoughts?
My final thoughts would just be to speak into any woman of color that is out there and who is wanting to be active or is currently being active and who feels weakened, who feels emotionally damaged. Take a moment and make sure that you do self-care. That is very important. I know that we are charged. We have a whole list of things that we need to do. And we do have it on our shoulders to make sure that we take care of our nation. We always have been. It's on our shoulders again. Just deal with it. But first, make sure you take care of yourself. Make sure your health, your mental health. Take time for yourself. Make sure you pray. Make sure you are covered before you leave your home, and make sure that you have a focused mindset on the job that is at hand. And make sure you encourage your fellow sisters if you see a shadow coming upon them, because we also have to continue to lift each other up while we do this work. It's not going to be easy. We're going to see a lot of dark days, but we have to be the light so that we can actually be able to see where we're going and what we have to do. So I would just say personally, for every woman who is out there, grab some sisters, you get on the phone, you do your Zoom calls, your lunch Zooms and everything else. You get on the phone to make your dollar and do your conference calls. Grab 10 people, 20 people, whomever you can. Get a busload. Let that be your thing that you do for the movement. And get you some women together, get you some Black men together, and take them down to the polls and vote. It's something that we must do.
Excellent advice about self-care in the midst of all of this. Tamika, I'm going to give the final word to you. Your final thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know why you did that. You should have asked the bishop to speak last because she preached a mini sermon, and also my sister Portia. I'm reminded of this moment from this weekend that I still haven't been totally able to process. There were two different events happening on Saturday. A women's empowerment. We got to find a new term because I follow what my big sis Bishop has said about the word empowerment. But there was a women's event happening and a men's event happening. Both had been equally publicized. And for whatever reason, a white militia group by the name of 3 Percenters decided to show up with 40 white men and women with weapons outside of our event. And the men stopped their event to come over to line up around our venue and to allow us to continue the conversations that we were having there. And what touched me when the bishop was speaking about this idea that no sister can be left behind, it pains me that we spend so much time in conflict when other people are very united in their fight against us. We have to find a way to have our creative tension, have our discussions, but also understand that if no sister is going to be left behind, even if we don't like the ways in which people operate, the movement must have a tent that's big enough to deal with 40 white men who decided to show up to try to intimidate women who were in a room doing nothing more than talking about a sister who was murdered, but also trying to figure out how we will not be murdered ourselves. We have to own that statement that no sister can be left behind. I certainly want to do that. I want to be better at it. And I hope that what we take from this conversation and this idea that we've got to turn our people out to vote in just days, how can we do that if our rhetoric and our tone is divisive versus us coming together to get the work done that needs to be done? Because guess what? They picking the post office boxes up off the corner. So we got like real work to do. And our debate on social media is not going to get it done. Big Mama's sitting on her steps, immobile, and she needs somebody to help her fill out her absentee ballot and get it down to the post office. That's the real work that we need to be doing, sisters. No sister left behind.
Yes.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. I mean, I want to thank all of you for such a focused and urgent and important conversation. I can certainly say that this has put on full display, the ongoing work of the Black women who are leading and have led both in our country's history and in this current moment up against the dual pandemics of coronavirus and racism, and leading into the most consequential election that I think any of us have ever lived through. So thank you so much for this conversation, and thank you so much to all of you who were tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe, everybody. Take care out there.
Hi, this is Macy Graham here with the California Jet Club, and we're so excited to perform for you for the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington, the world's first virtual March on Washington, and we're asking you all to come together and make change and make a difference in the world and make progress and unite. And here we go. White man, I am not my grandmother. I'm from the city, Canton, Ohio. I'm just a lady, but I think like a man. You hating me and I don't understand. You judging me, you wanna send me to hell. God is my father and I got my bail. You come for me and let me make it clear. I'll whip your woo, woo, woo. I'll whip your woo, woo. I'll whip your woo, woo. I'll whip your woo. I'll whip your woo. Hey, white man, you can best believe I matter. And I'm offended by your chatter. But I'm living good on the edge of myself. I make a drink and I toast a mile. Let's come together. Let's make it better. Let's come together. Let's make it better. And if you don't agree, I'll make it clear. I will be whoa, 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 whoa. Yeah, all right. Come on.
tonight has been amazing. Hers I Can't Breathe video. Performances by PJ Morton, Macy Gray, and newcomer Jared Johnson. We heard from President Derek Johnson, Al Sharpton, Mahershala Ali, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Senator Cory Booker, Cheryl Underwood, Stacey Abrams, and so many more. The conversations with Dr. Cole, Tamika Mallory, Portia Williams, and Bishop Daughtry were incredible. And the documentary on women in the movement, I was deeply moved, and I'm so proud to be a Black woman. This evening was truly epic, and tomorrow promises to be as well. Come back right here. Tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Eastern, we'll have words of reflection and inspiration by Dr. Yusef Salaam of the Exonerated Five, leaders of the Divine Nine, Representative Nanette Diaz Barragan, and the chairman of the NAACP, Leon Russell. We'll also have performances by BB Winans, Burna Boy, and Macy Gray will be back for day 2. We'll close the evening with a very special message from Reverend Dr. William Barber, the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign. And again, thank you for spending time with us this evening. And we'll see you back right here tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Eastern. You won't want to miss a moment.